Hello, everyone. I am back again with another James Bond review. I'm just freshly back from the cinema. I've wiped away the tears because today, of course, we are talking about On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the 1969 film directed by Peter R. Hunt, who was the editor on the franchise, and I think he was second unit director on some of them as well. This was his directorial debut, and this was his sort of like last soiree into the James Bond franchise. This was it. What signed off after this one, and what an absolute swan song to sign off on too. We've got a lot to talk about on this one. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, quite rightly so, is without a shadow of a doubt a cult favorite. Often appears, if it's not number one, it's very high up in the list of best Bond films. When it came out, though, it was very mixed reviews, which, I can understand. It's very different. It's a lot more stripped back. It's a lot more dramatic, a lot more emotional, and takes itself a lot more seriously, I would say. Chief among them, the fact that it follows the novel very closely compared to some of the previous films that have come out. So we're going to talk about all the stuff. You know the score by now. If you've been following me, then you know exactly what we're doing tonight, how in depth we go and talk about these things. And if you are new to this, do consider subscribing to the channel for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, discussions, and live streams. I actually forgot how long this film was. I think in actual fact, until Casino Royale came out in 2006. I think this is the longest James Bond film in terms of runtime. But I'm loving it. I'm loving it week to week. And of course, next week, I'm also going to be back with Diamonds Are Forever. That's going to be at the slightly earlier time next week. That's going to be Tuesday, the 31st of May at 11 p.m. And I'm going to have some thoughts on that, I'm sure, when we get to it. In the meantime, you know the score as well. Follow me on Twitter. You can find me at Hobbit Fan Editor. That's at Hobbit Fan Editor, where I'm talking about all the James Bond films week to week, of course. But tomorrow we've also got another film coming out. It's been long since delayed, but I will be going live at 8 p.m. British Standard Time tomorrow for my review on Top Gun Maverick. I'm very much looking forward to that. Can't wait. And fingers crossed it's really, really good because I'm a massive 80s fan. I'm a massive fan of Top Gun. But of course, we'll get to that tomorrow. In the meantime, let me know what you think of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mentioned that when this film came out, it was very, divisive. People kind of split down the middle on it, or very mixed, but people have since had a turnaround on this. But let me know, which camp do you fall in? Maybe you're still not too keen on it. Maybe you held it as one of the best James Bond films. Do let me know. And of course, I put this question to you guys every single week. What is your favorite James Bond film, and who is your favorite actor to play Bond? Maybe On Her Majesty's Secret Service could be your favorite Bond film. And if it is, I will not disagree with you on that, because it is fantastic. And I guess that's kind of the preamble, and it kind of gives away my initial opinions on this film. Of course, I've talked about this film before last year, but part of the reason that I'm doing this doing these reviews and going back to this franchise a lot quicker than I thought I was, is that, I'm not going to, of course, I'm going to snap up the opportunity to go and see the James Bond films on the big screen now that, Odeon are putting them all on each week. But also, I'm taking this as the opportunity to reevaluate the films as well. Maybe my opinions improve on these films. Maybe they decline, or maybe they kind of stay the same where they were. I mean, seeing this film on the big screen was an absolute delight. I think that the Prince Charles Cinema in London played this last year. They played a whole bunch of the James Bond films. I went to see GoldenEye there, and I think this was the one that they were going to play the following week. And unfortunately, I didn't get to see it at the time. I really wanted to. And thankfully now, 60 Years of Bond, of course, which is the name of this playlist, which is why we're going back to all these Bond films. I finally got my chance to see it on the big screen. So it was an absolute treat. I look forward to every single Tuesday now, every single Tuesday evening, grabbing my cinema snacks, which I have right here. I've eaten so much popcorn tonight. I think I've eaten my own body weight in popcorn. Medium popcorn is very, very, eyes bigger than my belly, I think, scenario, to put it lightly. But On Her Majesty's Secret Service, so this is the third or fourth time I've seen this film. And what the question that I want to pitch to you guys is, I mean, maybe some of you watching this saw this originally when it came out. If you did, I'd be very interested to hear your opinion on it. I want to know what's more tragic watching this film, not knowing the ending and watching it for the first time, completely ignorant to what happens in it, or do you think it's more tragic knowing ultimately where it ends and kind of watching it all play out? Because I'm inclined to think that it's actually more tragic if you know the ending. And I was picking up on a lot more things in the conversations and everything in the back and forth between George Lazenby and Diana Rigg, especially at the beginning of the film, where she talks about, I don't know if she talks about dying, and he says, "Oh, we don't want you to die today," or something like that. And you're like, oh my God. Lines like that, I'm paraphrasing, that's not the exact line, but there's little moments, there's little bits in the dialogue that I never clocked before, which just made me really, really sad. Let's talk about George Lazenby then, because of course we have a new Bond with this, a one and done. I don't know if he's got the worst agent in the world or the greatest agent in the world. So his agent convinced him that the spy genre wasn't going to last. It was going to kind of peter out into the 70s, and that he advised George Lazenby to not continue. I think originally Eon wanted to sign George Lazenby up to a 7-picture deal. And then during production, he announced that he was just going to do the one film. Which, you know, at the time, and you could argue, you know, financially, that's financial suicide, not, you know, signing up to one of the greatest, most enduring franchises of all time that's made countless money, that, you know, are on 25 films now, 26 coming out at some point in the future, maybe. You'd be insane to turn that down. And he turned it down. But then on the flip side, with hindsight, he has, you know, it's kind of like a diamond in the rough James Bond film, really, isn't it? It's memorable for many ways, you know, for the story, the screenwriting, and the dramatic moments that happen in the film. But also, I think the fact that George Lazenby only did this one kind of adds to that special, unique quality of this film. It's very standalone, but it's that loose continuity which I always appreciate with the James Bond films. You go into each film kind of expecting it to be its own entity, but there's a few loose little threads here that connect it to the previous ones. And actually, I'll say, you know, from the producers and everything of this film, Saltzman and Broccoli, very, very bold decision to cast Lazenby in the first place. You know, he was, I think he was a model before anything, wasn't he? And I think he did a bunch of commercials before this point, but he'd never acted before. You're 6 films in with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and your main headliner, James, you know, you just had Connery, who's retired from the role. He will be back in the next one. We'll get to that when we get to it. And you put George Lazenby in the driving seat, who's had no prior acting experience, to one of the biggest, most financially successful franchises of all time. It's almost unheard of now that you get an unknown in for something like that. Well, I guess we'll find out who they cast as the next James Bond. But it completely astounds me that they did that. Now, there are some reports as well that, you know, a lot of the cast and the crew were very short with Lazenby, and he kind of got the short end of the stick, which, if that's to be believed, and that did actually happen, is a real shame. I did a little bit of reading on the film, and it's conflicting reports, and I don't think we're ever going to know. Some people, you know, from the reading were saying that George Lazenby was given no real direction on the film. Peter R. Hunt, of course, the director, would communicate to him via his assistant, but wouldn't address him in person. There are some aspects as well that I was reading about Hunt's approach to getting what he needed to get out of the character, and to get out of Lazenby's performance, that were almost borderline Kubrick. And, you know, if you've done some reading or you've watched like the behind the scenes on The Shining, for example, how Kubrick treated Shelley Duvall, in that he would just get her to do take after take after take, you know, for hours on end, getting her to that absolutely like emotional breaking point. And then that, you know, that was all in the purpose of getting that performance out of her that he wanted, the absolute perfectionist. And there's a story, I think it's the final scene of the film, actually, like the very tragic moment at the end, where he made Lazenby just reshoot and rehearse that scene again and again all day, from like 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. when they finally shot the scene, because they wanted him to be exhausted and exasperated and, you know, completely given everything to the role. And if that's the case, you know, I will say that Lazenby as an actor, I can't say he's my favorite Bond. Maybe some people do have him as their favorite, but for me, it's very difficult to say he's my favorite because he only did one. It's kind of in the same camp that I have with Dalton as well. Now, I will say, jumping ahead, and I'm kind of answering that question that I pitched to everyone earlier about what is your favorite James Bond film and who is your favorite actor to play Bond. I guess I'm going to spoil mine. Timothy Dalton has my favorite single favorite performance of Bond from License to Kill. That is as close to Bond as I think you're going to get. Incredible, charismatic, suave, and can handle the action well, and also has that level of trauma and that kind of distance quality to himself from people, which I think is, absolutely integral to a Bond character. And I think Timothy Dalton nails it. He is my favorite performance as Bond, but overall, I can't say he is my favorite Bond because he only did 2 films. I'm not too keen on Living Daylights, but maybe my opinion will change once we get to Living Daylights and I get to see it again, because I have only seen that film once. But License to Kill is my favorite Bond film. But in terms of my favorite Bond, I would probably go with Roger Moore. He had the most films. He's the gentleman Bond, and I just find all of his films immensely entertaining with Roger Moore. So that's why I say Roger Moore is my favorite Bond. But we'll get to Roger Moore soon. We'll get to Dalton. We'll get to all of them soon. It will come around before you know it. So with Lazenby, and what I find with a lot of actors is that their first Bond film, maybe first 2, but usually their first one, it's almost like they're testing the waters. They're trying to discover the character a little bit more. They're not quite, get into a few films later, like 2 or 3 films into their tenure, boom, they've got it, and they are James Bond in that part. But for the first film, it almost feels like they're becoming acclimatized to the role and the character and just working out the kinks kind of thing. And not to say Lazenby's bad in this, not by any stretch of the imagination. I think he is actually a very good James Bond. I think the delivery on some of his lines, and maybe this could be the input because he didn't have much. If you believe this, he didn't really have much of a back and forth with the director. He wasn't really given much direction. And this is his acting debut as well. And for an acting debut, I think he did astoundingly well, especially with, the high praise for Connery that he was up against. It's almost being a support act almost and coming out after the headliner. That's a very tough act to follow. And I think he did a very good job with it. I do think, however, if he had have taken those 7 films and we had have got more films with Lazenby, it is a role and it is a character that he would have grown into. And I think we would have seen that performance improve from film to film. There are a couple of lines here, when he's delivering the one-liners where he doesn't seem like he has that gumption. He doesn't seem to have that confidence behind his lines when he says it. And it's still, I'm not saying he feels like a bit of a weedy Bond because, we see him, he doesn't pull any punches in the opening scene. He drowns a guy in the opening scene, for God's sake. And, the fight scenes do feel a lot more brutal in this, that he is really gets stuck in, kind of what we eventually see with Daniel Craig's Bond as well, the rough and ready, rough and tumble kind of Bond. But it's just some of the line delivery. It doesn't feel like it has that power behind it. It doesn't have that natural charisma, that natural confidence that Sean Connery exuded, especially, back in From Russia with Love and Goldfinger, for example. But it's always in that nebulous what if realm of James Bond, isn't it? It's like, oh, what if Lazenby had got to make his revenge direct sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service? What if Dalton got a 3rd film? Which still makes me really depressed that we never got a 3rd Dalton James Bond film. But as I said, we'll get to that when we get to Dalton. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I actually, watching this film again, I love that slow reveal of the character. And I think, following up Sean Connery's tenure as Bond, that was a very smart way to do it. I think all of the strongest Bond films, even if we're so many films in with a single Bond, I always think it's great when they delay the reveal of Bond, or it's a lot more mysterious. You don't just show him on screen. You build up to his reveal. And he is a character that is demanding of that build up, I think. But because of the situation they were in where, the person who helmed their, was the front man of their first 5 films, who everyone loved, who everyone praised, and was James Bond to, the whole audience, bringing anyone new in is going to be a very tough act to follow. So I like that when we're introduced to Bond, it's, all the way through the opening scene, pretty much. A lot of people say, you see him lighting the cigarette, you see his chin, you see his hand on the wheel, sort of driving the car. But even the whole scene on the beach with Tracy and the fight that ensues there, it's almost shot at magic hour, isn't it? It's like dusk or sunrise, I think, or something like that, or dawn maybe. The lighting in the scene's just beautiful. I did want to say that actually, that's one thing that I've always noticed with that scene, but especially seeing it on the big screen, the cinematography of that whole opening scene on the beach and the lighting is just absolutely gorgeous. You've got the I don't know if it's sunrise or sunset, I don't know. but you've got that beautiful sunlight. It's just glistening across the sea, and it's sort of like glimmering. But the way that it's shot as well, you have that sort of backlight, but the way that everyone's shot on the beach, it almost looks like silhouette. Everyone's just kind of blacked out, and you kind of struggle to make out the features on the people, which again kind of builds up to that reveal. We see this guy, punching all these people and drowning them. And of course, we know it's Bond, but you don't really get a good look at his face until he delivers the line, that this never happened to the other guy, which is a great fourth wall breaking moment and a perfect reveal, which takes us straight into that title sequence with John Barry's theme for this. So I've always loved that opening sequence. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And there are so many moments in this film where the cinematographer of this was Michael Reed. It's just brilliant. The editing as well. Now, I think the editing has aged a little bit poorly. There's a lot of scenes in there that are kind of sped up, which you get a lot with the earlier James Bond films. Clearly it was shot at a much slower pace, but in the editing they were trying to keep that kinetic feel and keep it moving, keep it action packed. But there's a lot of scenes that are kind of awkwardly sped up, so they do stick out quite a way. But the editor of this, John Glenn, obviously Peter R. Hunt wasn't in the editorial seat this time, he was in the directorial seat. But I think that John Glenn really matched Peter Hunt's style of editing and those really, really quick cuts, sometimes a little bit too quick. Sometimes it's like a handful of frames is a shot, and I think you could have trimmed that out, and I think it would have smoothed it out a lot. But what do I know? What do I know, right, of how to edit a whole movie like that? But yeah, so I appreciate that they were trying to emulate that style and trying to get that fast-paced, especially in the fight scenes as well. I mentioned the one on the beach, which is brilliant, where he drowns the guy. Very kind of hard-hitting for Bond in that respect. And, I think what we'd eventually see with a Dalton and with a Craig, where we really see a Bond that's kind of brutal like that and isn't afraid to go those places. But also a very sensitive Bond as well. This is, it's a love story fundamentally, and I know that love has played an element in all of the other ones throughout the Bond girl, but this was like a true romance film, which had like all the Bondisms and the spy work and everything going along with it, and clearly all from Ian Fleming's novel. And as I mentioned, I think that this one, and I think that Peter R. Hunt was very clear about this, that there were rumors that he turned up to set every single time with an annotated copy of the book they were adapting. Now, I've never read the book for this, and I'm sure they've taken some artistic liberties here and there, probably the callbacks to the previous James Bond films, everything like that. There are some continuity errors as well with this film following You Only Live Twice, which is a brilliant segue, actually. If you haven't checked my review for You Only Live Twice, which I did last week, go and check it out. There is a playlist on my channel now where you can find all of my previous James Bond reviews. So if you're just discovering this one, go back. There's 5 other ones to catch up with. But I get the impression that as a director, Peter Hunt wanted to go back to basics with this. He'd worked on all the previous ones. You Only Live Twice, had elements of romance in there. Of course it did, where Bond has to get married in order to create that disguise and to try and, ingratiate himself into the culture. So I don't know if this was, I've kind of got a No Time to Die. This is a brilliant thing to bring up right now, and sort of like a very contemporary example of going back to this film. We now have the 25th Bond film with Daniel Craig, Daniel Craig's final one, which has so many callbacks to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. For all intents and purposes, it almost kind of feels like it's aping so much from this film. And actually, that's one of my biggest negatives of No Time to Die, that it does constantly reuse "We have all the time in the world." That they mention that line every single chance they get, and you even get the main theme. You even get John Barry's On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme that reprises in that film. And I don't like that, because to me, all of those ingredients, everything I just mentioned, are On Her Majesty's Secret Service. They belong to that film. We have all the time in the world is the Bond theme, not an official Bond theme, I know, but it features very heavily in the film, of course, doesn't it? It all exclusively belongs to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. We Have All the Time in the World has never been a romantic song that has been attached to the Bond character whenever he's, falls in love with everyone. For example, at the end of, License to Kill, with Bond and Pam Bouvier, you don't get We Have All the Time in the World start playing. You know, if they'd have started that with this film, and every single time Bond's in a romantic entanglement, we get the reprise of that theme, that would be fine. But to me, No Time to Die, it almost didn't have an identity of its own. It was like, oh, people remember On Her Majesty's Secret Service and how tragic and emotional and sad and, you know, all the emotions that you feel when you watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So let's just slap that theme in. Let's just slap that line in, because it's easy nostalgia, isn't it? You latch onto the emotions that you have from On Her Majesty's Secret Service and apply them to No Time to Die, rather than No Time to Die having an emotional experience of its own, you know, of saying something new, of bringing new emotions and new ingredients to the film. So I didn't like the inclusion of We Have All the Time in the World in that film, actually. When that got name dropped towards the beginning of the film, I kind of rolled my eyes. But, you know, all those things aside, it's kind of nice to see On Her Majesty's Secret Service get the recognition in 2021. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep track of time. When No Time to Die was meant to come out, and of course kept getting delayed, didn't it? That even in 2021, you know, so many years on Her Majesty's Secret Service has kind of found its footing now as that cult favorite, as that important Bond film. But no more reusing themes, please. There is actually a case where they sort of hint at a theme in this film, which I actually like these callbacks. They are very kind of, oh, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But there are so many fourth wall breaking moments in this, and, you know, continuing the Bond franchise despite some of the continuity errors. For example, you get a caretaker that whistles the Goldfinger theme, Shirley Bassey. There's the scene in the film which I absolutely love, where he has all the gadgets. He puts all the gadgets on the table from the previous Bond films. Well, at least from Dr. No, from Russia with Love, and Thunderball. And you get the themes that kick in, which isn't very subtle, but I like that they included that. And it's that loose continuity between all of the films. Of course, I mentioned the continuity doesn't really work in the respect that Blofeld witnessed James Bond in You Only Live Twice, and they converse in that film, and he recognizes Bond. And of course, he doesn't recognize him in this film. I know that Bond's under the disguise of, oh God, what's his name? Hillary, I'm blanking. If anyone's watching this, please do comment the name. Hillary Bray. So you could argue maybe it's the Clark Kent effect. He's not wearing glasses as far as I remember, though. So I think in the original script, the idea was to have Bond begin the film having had plastic surgery, which would explain his change of appearance despite being the same character, and also account for the fact that Blofeld doesn't recognize him. Now, I think that idea is, you know, stretches the imagination a little bit, that Bond's had all this, you know, reconstructive surgery. But I guess you could maybe argue as well that Blofeld does come the next film, because we have Charles Gray playing him in Diamonds Are Forever, and he certainly isn't Donald Pleasance, and he certainly isn't Telly Savalas. So, don't know. Again, that loose continuity, I don't have a problem with it in these earlier Bond films. I just go to them to have fun. And there's bits of continuity here which kind of keeps it grounded in the same world, but it plays very, you know, fast and loose with it, which I don't mind at all. Let's talk about the one and only Diana Rigg from this film. So Tracy, or for her full title, Countess Tracy de Vincenzo. Is it Vincenzo? I can't Italian. Tracy. Let's just call her Tracy. She's my favorite Bond girl. You know, it's kind of Tracy and Vesper from Casino Royale, and it kind of goes back and forth every now and then. I love Pam Bouvier as well. They're probably my top three. There you go. But oh God, I can't even words. Where do you even begin to describe Diana Rigg from this film? She's the ultimate tragic Bond girl, though, isn't she? But I love how, you know, headstrong she is. She talks back to Bond, you know, especially at the beginning of the film. She's a very tortured character as well, you know, like the whole suicide angle to her as well. Like it's a very dark angle they go down with the character, a very tragic one. Now, there are some people that would probably say by 2022 standpoints, it's not proper and everything like that. And there are some parts of it. It's very much a taming of the shrew situation at the beginning. You know, her father is like, she needs a man to dominate her and to make love to her until she falls in love with him. And, you know, there's lines like that. That wouldn't fly in 2022. Of course it wouldn't now. So there is that kind of taming of the shrew element to it, where she is very feisty and she very headstrong, as I mentioned. So she needs she needs a strong man to tame her, essentially, and to make her more submissive and everything like that. But even with that angle, and there's a moment at the end of the film, I couldn't remember this from the film, so this caught me off guard. It's towards the end where I think they're planting all like the dynamite to blow up the observatory thing that Blofeld's in. And she wants to go back inside and rescue Bond, and her father just right hooks her and knocks the fuck out in one punch. And it was hilarious because it caught me completely off guard. I didn't remember that in the film at all. And then he says a line, something like, spare the rod, spoil the child, or something. I was like, oh my God. Just, with this really over the top punch sound effect as well. So there are some moments like that do kind of mar the character just a little bit with the angle I think they were trying to go down. But even then, towards the end of the film, where they're kind of storming the base at the end, because you've got to have that in a Bond film, right? You've got to have a whole bunch of soldiers or army or ninjas showing up to a place, and just a big running gunfight between all the evil forces and all the good forces fighting each other. So it's during that scene, and it's so cool when it kicks in, because it hasn't really featured much. Of course it plays at the beginning of the film, but the main James Bond theme, and when that kicks in, when the helicopters are flying in and they're just they're running, it's a running gunfight, it's so cool. And yeah, Bond's getting in the action. My favorite part with Bond in that whole part, and again a bit that I completely forgot about, is where he's going down the curling, I don't know what you call it, the bit that you kind of sweep when you're playing curling, and it's all slippery and slidey, and he's just on his stomach and he's sliding down and he's just shooting at people. So goddamn cool. And I couldn't remember that was in the film, so that was a cool thing to watch. But when the theme's kicking in, and yes, Bond's doing some cool stuff, but the focus of that fight is actually on Tracy, and Tracy fighting her way out. And of course, the bit where she sort of sticks the guy to the wall, there's that kind of like art. I don't know why that's there. There's just some sharp, jagged spikes that are hanging out from the wall. It looks like a kind of art or sculpture or something. And of course, the guy gets impaled on it. She breaks the bottle, and she's swiping at the assailant that's trying to get her. She is the focus on that fight when that theme's kicking in, and it's cool. And it's cool to see Diana Rigg fight. Of course she was in the Avengers, wasn't she? So I mean, I can't say enough positive words about Tracy. By today's standards, you could argue that they could dial down on that whole taming of the shrew thing, but I don't mind it, because it doesn't come across as like really mean spirited or anything like that, because you really buy the love story between Lazenby and Diana Rigg. They play it fantastically together, which is actually hilarious, because there's a lot of things that you can read about where the two hated each other on set. There's the whole story of Diana Rigg saying to Lazenby, like, oh, by the way, I'm having garlic for dinner, so I hope you are too, because they were having like a kissing scene later on. And I always find that fascinating. If you have two and of course it happens, actors that don't get on with each other, but then when you see it on screen, they their mind's on the job, and they get it done, and you don't see any of that animosity coming through on screen. And I think that Lazenby and Diana Rigg in this film have amazing chemistry. The romantic scenes, of course, aided by John Barry's wonderful score, probably one of his best. Honestly, watching this film tonight, every single time the orchestral version of We Have All the Time in the World came on, I was welling up. It's such a sublime piece of music. Probably one of the best love themes, romance themes ever written by man. It gets me every time. I'm getting misty now. I'm just thinking about it. It's a lovely song, wonderful song. I'm not too keen on the Louis Armstrong version. I appreciate it, but it's the orchestral version for me. It's wonderful. That, and I think All Time High for me in terms of romance themes are John Barry's best, I would say, certainly with the James Bond themes. Which takes us on to the ending now. after No Time to Die, I'm kind of in a position now where I'm like, oh, this is going to be massive spoiler alert, by the way, for No Time to Die. It almost feels like the Han Solo effect after The Force Awakens. It's like, how much time is socially acceptable before you can talk about the ending of the film? Can we talk about the end of No Time to Die now? I think we can. I think James Bond fans are, if you're a James Bond fan and you haven't seen it yet, what are you playing at? I came out of that film, and of course we'll talk about this more in depth once we get to No Time to Die towards October. I have a problem with the ending and certain things that it did that, to me, you just don't do in a James Bond film. Chief among them, Bond never dies. You don't kill off James Bond, and certainly not in the really detached, CGI-filled, crappy way they kind of did it in the film. And Bond should never have a kid. Like Bond, Matilda, or whatever her name is, and Dudu, the doll, shouldn't happen in a Bond film. That's, to me personally, obviously people could disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine if you do. So I'm interested to hear what people think with this film, in the, Bond should never get married, Bond should never tie himself down. Of course, Bond married in the previous film and You Only Live Twice, so I hope they divorced, because unless the marriage was annulled, because Bond is committing bigotry right now. But if anyone's going to commit bigotry, by God, it's going to be James Bond, right? But it works for this film, and I like that. And I don't know why I should like that, because to me, Bond should have strict rules. He is the womanizer, but I'm a sucker for the romantic James Bond films. I really, especially if that Bond and Bond girl have amazing chemistry, which of course Lazenby and Diana Rigg do in this. Timothy Dalton and I forgot the name of the actress, but the one who plays Pam Bouvier. And even in Living Daylights as well, I'm not too keen on that film, but they do have it's just a very nice love story. It really is. And, maybe I'm an old romantic at heart and I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, but I like that in my James Bond film. It doesn't have to last between two films, but just for that one film, because there's going to be a new Bond girl in the following film. That's just how it goes. Unless, we do Spectre into No Time to Die. That's a different story. We'll get to that when we get to it. But for that one film, they've got to make me believe that romance. And I do in this. And of course, when you get to the ending, even more so, I think, if you know the ending and you know where it's going, it really hits you hard. It does. And, again, that could be another thing, that you shouldn't leave a Bond film miserable or sad or crying. You shouldn't. You should end exhilarated, like, yeah, Bond's going to come back, James Bond will return. But this one does end on a real downer, but it kind of adds to that unique quality of this film for me. It is that diamond in the rough. It's the one that everyone goes, it's that weird outline. It's Lazenby's one and done. It's, the one where the Bond girl dies at the end, and it's, it's really sad, and it hits you at that moment. It's a wonderful scene. To me, it's one of the best James Bond scenes of all time. Don't get me wrong, I love my campy, over-the-top, fun, action-packed James Bond films. Of course I do. With one-liners aplenty and really tongue-in-cheek, which is actually why I'm very curious now going to Diamonds Are Forever next week, because I'm hoping that film kind of has a new lease on life for me, and I can appreciate it for what it is. But this film is just different, and that ending is just outstanding to me. I like when they go those darker places with the James Bond character. Not overly dark. I think it has to have that balance, but as long as there's an element of that to the character, there's an element of that tragedy to the character, and the fact that James Bond, in the life that he leads and the job that he's in, he can't have all of these nice luxuries that we take for granted. He can't have that civilian life. Every time, every woman he gets close to dies. And, we've seen that in the previous Bond films before this one, but this was different. He was settling down with this person. This was the one. This was the one where he was going to have, the wife, the kids. What does he say? 3 girls and 3 boys. The dogs, the cats, the white picket fence, the whole 9 yards, everything. This was the one. And it's just cruelly snatched away from him in that, It's heartbreaking. It really is. And I wish the end of the film would leave you with those emotions a little bit more, because it takes you to that place and it gets you to there. we have those few closing bars of the measure of the song that play into the credits. And if only then in the credits they would have kicked in with Louis Armstrong's "We Have All the Time in the World," which is, of course, what No Time to Die did at the end. If you did get emotional at the end, and if you were crying, when that theme kicks in at the end, it does leave you with those emotions. It doesn't kick in with the loud James Bond fanfare at the end, which of course this film does. And I do feel that takes away from the emotion of that scene. I wish they would have just let it play over the credits. I actually went to see this with someone tonight, and the first thing that they mentioned walking out of the film, they had seen the film before, but it had been many years since they last watched it. They said to me, I wish they'd have just let that emotion hang for a little bit longer at the end. And I agree. I think I mentioned that last year as well. It's massive tonal whiplash when that Bond theme kicks in. But maybe that was a studio decision. Maybe they were trying to go, oh, don't worry, guys. It's just because it's really sad. He's going to come back in the next one. And, the original idea for the next one, Diamonds Are Forever, was going to be a all-out kind of how Quantum of Solace is a direct sequel to Casino Royale. It was going to be that same thing with this one, that Diamonds Are Forever was going to pick up not too long after this one, with Bond on an all-out revenge mission against Blofeld and Irma Bunt. Now, after seeing... that plot does sound cool, don't get me wrong, but after seeing Quantum of Solace, it's like, does a direct sequel to a Bond film work? And personally, for me, I don't think it does. I think Bond always needs to be episodic, and when it tethers itself to a really strict continuity, that's when we start to see problems, and it can feel very limiting, which, we'll get to the Craig era when we get there. And there are elements of the Craig era that I do really enjoy, others that I really don't. And Quantum of Solace is that kind of weird one, isn't it, where it is that direct sequel. So maybe a direct sequel to this could have worked, and it could have been that. I don't know if they would have gone for a trilogy with it, but it could have been like a duology. You have the tragic end to Act 1, and then you go into your final act with Act 2, and it's an all-out revenge mission. And you would have believed it. If you'd have bought Telly Savalas back, for example, if you'd have bought like Irma Bunt back. But actually, didn't the actress... Am I misremembering this? Did she die not too long after this film, or am I thinking of someone else? Let me check real quick. Yeah, it was her final film role. Yeah, I thought I remembered hearing that Ilsa Stepat, I think, or I don't really know how to pronounce her name, unfortunately, but yeah, she passed away not too long after this film, I think. So that also, I think, kind of put the kibosh on the idea of having it be a direct sequel. Of course, you could have recast the character, but maybe that would have been a little bit, I don't know where they stood on that. They have recast characters a bunch of times, but in the wake of someone's death, I don't know if they've ever really done that with Bond, especially one film later, Let's see, what else can we talk about this? Oh, I mentioned Blofeld right there, so let's talk Telly Savalas in this. Out of all the elements of this film, the one thing that I was looking forward to the rescreening tonight and watching this film again was Telly Savalas, and I actually don't think I gave him as much credit as I should have last time that I reviewed it. To me, Donald Pleasance is the very physical Blofeld. He's the image of the character that you come to memorize, which could also be part and parcel with Dr. Evil's character from Austin Powers, who is pretty much solely based on Donald Pleasance's take on the character, I would say. That Telly Savalas kind of gets overlooked. He isn't as theatrical. He isn't as physical in the role as Donald Pleasance was, for example. And he's not as campy. Probably a good thing, actually. He's not as campy as the one that we get in Diamonds Are Forever. But he is fantastic as Blofeld. Now, I think they did say that the one they kind of wanted to get and the one they had in mind was Max von Sydow, which is actually kind of funny because eventually Max von Sydow would go on to play the role of Blofeld in Never Say Never Again. Was that 1983, I think, with Sean Connery? It wasn't a canon Bond film, although it did have those characters in there. So Telly Savalas is kind of that one in between. And I don't think many people really talk about him. They probably do within the Bond community, the close-knit Bond community. So out of everything tonight, he was the one aspect of the film that I was like, you know what, I don't think I was fair last time. Let's give this, let's give him another shot. And I think he's fantastic. And he might be my favorite take on the Blofeld character. I really wish we could have seen more of him. He's fantastic. When you get those scenes, and I would love to have seen Lazenby go on as well. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I would have loved to have seen Lazenby go on with Savalas's Blofeld and see more interplay with those characters. The bit where Bond gets knocked out and he wakes up in that kind of conference room or lounge area, actually, and Savalas is kind of sitting across from him and lays out all of his evil plan to Bond. I love that interplay between the characters, and Savalas he's a lot more charismatic, I would say, as Blofeld. He's not kind of this like creepy weirdo. I mean, he is very weird and he is very creepy, but he's, not in the same way that Pleasance was, where he was kind of this sickly, scarred, misshapen kind of character. He's very much, he commands the scene. He's got a very commanding voice, which of course plays into the plot as well, that he's using his voice to hypnotize his angels of death to commit all of these horrible acts that he wants to make all livestock and crops infertile, which is, it's a very out there plan for a Bond villain, but it'd be a world ending one potentially. And Savalas has this very cool and collected way, which I think is integral for a Blofeld character, but he has this really deep commanding voice to him, and also physically he looks like he could hold his own in a fight, like physically overpower Bond. I don't know how tall Savalas was, but just his structure, physically, his body, he looks like he could hold his own in a fight. So Blofeld now becomes this physical and psychological presence within the film, but still maintains all the ingredients that you expect from a Blofeld character. He is that very cowardly character where when he is becoming overpowered or his plans going to shit, he will escape, whether it be on skis or whether it be in a bobsleigh. Sorry, it's very late, guys. It's like 12:15. It's been a very long day. And I love that bobsleigh scene, by the way. When I kind of react to a film or when I become invested in it, especially in an action scene, or if it's really nail biting, or if you do like a sharp inhale of breath, I love when a film can get that out of me, especially in an action scene. And this scene did it. The bobsleigh scene did it. It's where he's pushing Bob. It's because I'm saying bobsleigh. He's pushing Bond's head outside of the bobsleigh, and he's in the helmet, and you're seeing the helmet kind of grate alongside. They're traveling at like ridiculous miles an hour, and Bond's head's like scraping against the ice on the side. And I was there like, of course, I've seen this film before. I know Bond survives, and there's loads of Bond films afterwards as well, because Bond never dies. Bond should never die in a film. But it was getting those emotions out of me. I was getting swept up in the magic of filmmaking and the tense quality of that action scene. It's fantastic. And then it's very silly at the end when with the neck brace, isn't it, with Blofeld getting snagged in the tree. It always makes me laugh. The one-liners in this film are very cringeworthy, though, watching it again. And don't get me wrong, I love a one-liner. I'm a big fan of 80s films, for example, and 80s one-liners are rife in those 80s action films. And I know that one-liners are no stranger to the Bond films, but maybe it was something with Lazenby's delivery on those one-liners potentially, or maybe because it was trying to be more of a dramatic Bond film. I think they should ease up on them a tad. So when he says like, oh, he's branched off, I'm like, there's no one around Bond. Like, why are you saying this? There is no reason to say this. You're saying this for our benefit, the audience, that love or hate or love to hate these one-liners. But there are some aspects in this film where I think when it's played more straight, they should ease up on the comedy a little bit more. And it's the same thing when we get to License to Kill. There are a few moments in that film with Dalton where he does try to have more of those comedic moments, and those are the parts, very few though, but those are the parts of that film that fall flat for me and kind of make me go, oh, I could have done without that, because I think a Bond film needs to have a consistent tone throughout. And if it wants to be a ridiculous, silly, quippy one, then absolutely have all of the one-liners. Have as many one-liners as you want. But when it's trying to play it more dramatically, or if it's going for a darker angle or it's played more straight, keep them to a minimum. That's kind of an aspect of Spectre as well. Spectre tries to have very silly moments as well, what with Bond sort of like landing on the couch at the beginning, The bit with the radio when he's in the car chase and the airbags and everything like that. And those are the moments in that film that kind of stick out to me like a sore thumb and don't feel right within the film, because it goes for such a somber and miserable and dark tone throughout. Most of it stick to that tone, you know. It's just a slight thing. But I do like in this how Blofeld is capable. You know, he is. It reminds me of that aspect of Darth Vader's character from A New Hope, where he flies out in his TIE fighter. He is co-piloting with, you know, his TIE fighters in that trench run at the end. He gets out there and he gets stuck in. Now, although Blofeld is that very cowardly character and he will flee, kind of like General Grievous, actually, you know, time to abandon ship. Because, you know, I've got to throw the Star Wars memes in there. But he is out there with his men chasing after Bond, chasing after Tracy, and he's getting stuck in. Who knew that Blofeld, among the master of disguise and, you know, a criminal mind, the world's greatest criminal mind, or is that... No, that's Lex Luthor, isn't it, from Superman? He's also a professional skier, because he will get on those skis and he will, you know, get out there and chase after Bond. Which takes me on to the skiing scenes, actually. This kind of goes in line with the cinematography. You know, they used Olympic quality or straight up Olympic skiers and bobslayers, I think, actually, during the filming of this film. And those scenes are fantastic. The only ropey scenes in there, and I've mentioned this other weeks, is some of the rear projection stuff. When you've got Bond or Telly Savalas or Diana Rigg just on a blue screen and they're just kind of skiing in place and they're projecting all of that stuff behind them, it's not convincing at all. And those shots do kind of take you out of the action a little bit, maybe just slightly. But as I've mentioned before, you know, with these earlier Bond films, that is part of the charm of filmmaking to me. With these earlier films from the 60s and the 70s, they had to make do with what they could. And I appreciate that effort and I appreciate that charm to it. And does it look as polished as a Bond film from 2022? No. But do I enjoy it more than a Bond film from 2022 or 2021? Yes, I absolutely do. Because, you know, they really had to think around things a lot more, and, you know, there were a lot more sort of like tricks up the sleeves and sleight of hands that they had to do. That some of those rear projection things, yeah, of course I know that Lazenby isn't really there and he's on a blue screen, but it's part of the magic of that scene. Even down to the fact of that little man, that little action figure that falls off the cliff, and they keep the camera on it just a little bit too long and they linger on it until he falls all the way to his death. That was the part where I actually think a one-liner would have worked really well. But instead we kind of get it in the more dramatic scenes, and I'm like, oh no, there's a time and the place for a one-liner, and the time and the place for that one-liner in that film was after that guy falls off the cliff very comedically. Let me know which one-liner you would have gone with. I'm trying to think of one now. Falling, cliff, skiing. I don't know. You guys think of one and let me know that a pun that you would put in there when that guy falls off the cliff. But the way it's shot's fantastic. You know, when the camera's getting stuck in amongst the action and it's, you know, it's following these people, it's amazing. And the camera quality as well. I don't actually know if these films have been upscaled for these re-releases or if these are just kind of like the Blu-ray prints that we've had before. I think there are still rumors that a 4K is coming out later this year, and I really hope it is, because I think these films will look astounding on 4K. I just hope they don't upscale them too much, because I think, you know, the film grain and things become more noticeable in 4K. You know, the definition's great, but sometimes for a lot of older films, to the detriment of those films, and you lose a lot of sort of that magic of filmmaking and that grain and that quality, that texture to the film, I think. But some of the snow drifts in this film, when the camera's panning over the snow drifts of, you know, when they're skiing and stuff in the snow looks like it's sparkling almost and glistening. And I'd never seen that before with this film. Seeing it on the big screen, it just looks absolutely miraculous. It just looks absolutely wonderful. I've talked about the music already, so I don't really need to go into that. But Barry's score, you know, just absolutely gorgeous. Like the main theme as well is amazing. The fact that he knew that he couldn't write a film called On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because it's a very long-winded title, and I defy anyone to come up with a title for that. You know, and actually it's given me flash forwards to when we get to Brosnan as well. The family coat of arms for, you know, for Bond's family is, you know, you only live twice, sorry, is the world is not enough. Was it Orbis Orbis non. Oh god, that's a Bond pub quiz question right there. Oh, I can't remember what it translates out to in Latin, but it's the world is not enough. I'm like, oh, we'll get there eventually. So I thought that was a cool mention there. I want to talk about one of my favorite scenes and one of my favorite sort of back and forths with characters in James Bond with this. And Q gets some great stuff, and M does as well within this film. I like the fact that we go to M's house, and he's working with butterfly pressing. I forgot what he calls it, the long-winded name for it, but that's interesting. It's not just M in the office. We do get M in the office, but we also see more of M's home life as well, and his hobbies and outside of the office. And I quite enjoy that. But one of my favorite dynamics in so many of these early James Bond films, is Lois Maxwell's Moneypenny. The interplay and the banter, back and forth between Bond and Moneypenny is just wonderful to me. I love it. It always puts a smile on my face. And though, even, Lois Maxwell's fantastic because whether it be Sean Connery, whether it be Lazenby, whether it be Roger Moore, she's so great with the Bond character, with all of those people, and that chemistry that she has with all of them. But to me, this was kind of the end of Moneypenny's character arc. I think after this, it kind of goes back to, like the regular back and forth that you come to expect, which, as I mentioned, I absolutely love. But this film is so different, of course, dramatically at the end with Bond getting married, that, I mean, it's a tragedy in the respect of, Tracy getting gunned down at the end in a drive-by. But to me, it's also equally as tragic for Moneypenny's character, that she, of course, she's happy for Bond, but he is the one that got away for her. And when she's crying at the end, and he looks over to her and he smiles. Oh god, I'm getting emotional now just thinking about it. It's the old romantic in me, I swear. And he throws his hat to her, and she catches it. It's like the bouquet thing, isn't it? But of course, the hat throwing has so many connotations to the previous Bond films. With him walking into the office, that's the first thing that he always did every time he walked into the office was throw his hat, and he throws his hat to her and she catches it. And then she has the moment, like I always cry at weddings, and she plays that fantastically. And that to me it's kind of the end of that interplay between those characters in many ways for me, because it got to that place. She witnessed Bond getting married, and then in the next film it kind of goes back to how it was, which is fine. And I still, as I mentioned, I still think she has great chemistry with all of the Bonds that she goes up against. But this was something different to me. This was like a really nice scene where Lois Maxwell got to really, tap into that character of Moneypenny. Moneypenny got that extra bit at the end of the film. And it's probably my favorite scene in the film, next to the ending. I'm sounding so morbid. Why do I like all of the why do I like all of the sad scenes from this film? But I do. It's because it went places that no previous Bond films had ever gone before, and so many Bond films didn't go to afterwards. That more dramatic Bond, it is so different, and it's sandwiched in between You Only Live Twice, and it's and Diamonds Are Forever among all films. Which let's get on to final thoughts for this film, because I don't really know how much I can talk about this film that hasn't already been said. But watching this film again tonight, I went into it knowing that I already love this film, knowing that it's one of my favorites, and all of the praise that's lauded on this film of how it went to different places. It really challenged the structure, and I do genuinely get the impression that Peter R. Hunt was intentionally trying to do that. He wanted this to be so different to the previous Bond films, to follow the novel as closely as possible, and to sort of go back to basics of those earlier Bond films as well, like Dr. No, or especially From Russia with Love as well, that's more dramatic, that's more story driven, that's more narrative focused. And you get that from the opening scene of this. Seaward Man says, show us how the camera drifts. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm not moving this Mac around. I'm not moving it. It's an iMac. It's staying where it is. But yeah, it's just how bold this film was, how against the grain it was, and how it broke from that formula. I say broke from that formula, but still did have every ingredient that needed to be in there that you come to expect from a Bond film. I think it's just narratively, I think this was way ahead of its time. in 1969. I don't, you know, when this came out, it came out to mixed reception from, you know, probably from Bond fans and everything. And it's only over time that it's had that respect and it's had that cult following and people going back to it like, oh yeah, that was actually one of the best, most emotional, dramatic Bond films. And not just that, but the ramifications of this film within the loose continuity itself. I always love and I always get a kick out of in the later Bond films. And of course the continuity is very loose and it's very wishy-washy. But every time, you know, Tracy is mentioned. You know, there's scenes where I think it's the opening scene from For Your Eyes Only, I think it is, where Roger Moore's Bond the opening of the film is Roger Moore's Bond going to the grave of Tracy and laying flowers at her grave. There's moments in, and this is why I love this film so much. I can't wait to talk about it. License to Kill. The whole element of that film is not just the fact of, you know, a similar tragedy happening to Felix on his wedding day with, you know, his wife getting, well, I think it's implied that she was raped and then murdered. And of course, Felix in that was maimed by a shark where he got his leg chewed off. So Bond's clearly on a revenge mission for that, but it's also personal because he is tapping into that tragic experience that he had when he got married with Tracy, because that is still in continuity. And I love that fact. And it's the pivotal moment of this. You know, it's not just No Time to Die that, you know, apes off this film as many times as it could. But I like those other Bond films where it goes back to it from that character perspective, that this is such a pivotal moment that has now become part of like Bond's canon for a long time, at least until we got to like, you know, the Brosnan films maybe. Although isn't there a scene in the is it in World Is Not Enough where it could be implied that he's referring to Tracy? I think there is actually a scene now I come to think of it. So no, hey, maybe they did it all the way through. Maybe they did it all the way through throughout all the Bonds. But I think that, you know, the other ones did it better maybe. And I liked when we see that haunted quality of that Bond character coming through, that this moment was such a pivotal moment to the character. And yes, the character can change actors and can change mannerisms and the way that he plays it, and, you know, all the continuity things don't make sense, but that one thing has kind of stayed as like a foundational thing for the Bond character, at least until we get to the Craig films, and then they kind of reference this film in a different way, which I don't really enjoy. This film's still outstanding. This was an absolute pleasure to rewatch this tonight, and, you know, picked up on so many things that I hadn't before. Just visually, the cinematography, the editing of this film. It's, you know, the lighting. There are moments as well. Of course, it's at Christmas, isn't it? At Blofeld's lair, at Blofeld's base. And there's just the way that they've got the Christmas lights and pull focus and the lighting and the way that it complements the scene. The hypnosis sequence, which is very psychedelic and very fiber optic with the lighting. It's just so great. It's fantastic. There are elements to Diana Rigg's character of Tracy, which, you know, you could say are quote unquote problematic for a modern audience. And, you know, taking that aside, there are elements that I do think the whole Taming of the Shrew thing does kind of falter the character and does kind of butt heads with what they were trying to do with the character. But I still find that Tracy is a very capable character. She saves Bond multiple times. She's driving the car. She can hold her own in a fight as well. She's headstrong. And it's just that wonderful romance story, that tragic love story that Bond can never have these luxuries. He can never find true love. It's very fleeting, but he's always got to be a man for his country, and Bond will always be there for his country. You know, he's that very tragic character, and Bond doesn't die in action, and Bond never gives up, and Bond doesn't die. We'll get to it, guys. We'll get to it. But I can't say enough positive things about this. One of my only negatives is that I just wish they'd have played We Have All the Time in the World in the end credits, apart from the Bond theme, just to really let that emotion sink in. But hands down, one of the best Bond films, the most unique, and I really appreciate what the director Peter Hunt was trying to do with this. Clearly knew what Bond needed to be for his vision, for his take on Bond. You know, working on all the previous ones would have reinforced what he wanted to do with this. A kind of back to basics, more narrative, more story-driven film that I think is tremendous and that I think still holds up today. And in terms of the Bond franchise, is easily one of the most daring, one of the most bold. And as it is now, thankfully, after all these years, one of the most critical, favoured Bond films. and cult favorite. It's just taken many years to get there, but we finally got there, you know. I think that's everything that I can talk about with this film. I'm coming up to an hour on it now, so I'm going to round out because it is very late and I still need to get some other things done tonight. So, of course, let me know your thoughts and what you think on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Do you think it is deserving of the cult status that it has nowadays? Or maybe you're still kind of on the fence on it and maybe you're mixed about it. But anything regarding on Her Majesty's Secret Service or indeed the Bond franchise overall, please do comment. I love chatting to you guys about not just Bond, but films in general. But, you know, we're very much at home with the Bond films with this, haven't we? So, and of course, opening the question to you guys as well. Which is your favorite James Bond film and who is your favorite actor to play James Bond? It's a very tough question. You know, everyone's got their Bond, haven't they? But I think that everyone can in some way respect what each Bond has brought to the table in many ways. Of course, if you're enjoying the James Bond content, do subscribe to the channel for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, discussions, and live streams. I know I've been very focused on the James Bond stuff recently, but tomorrow, in case you haven't got sick of me tonight talking about James Bond, tomorrow I'm going to be back talking about a very different film, Top Gun Maverick. So I'm going to be live tomorrow at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. I can't wait to see that film, purely for the fact that I never want to see that film trailer again. I got the trailer for it tonight in front of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and actually there is a midnight screening tonight of Top Gun Maverick. So it's, well, it will be starting about now actually, and they were still playing a trailer for it before On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is just astounding to me. But of course, I'll be seeing it tomorrow and talking about it at 8 p.m. I'm not seeing it on an IMAX, unfortunately, but I am seeing it in Odeon iSense, so bigger screen, more impressive sound system for it. So I'm ready to feel those seats vibrate and feel like I'm in one of those jets along with Tom Cruise. So fingers crossed. I hope it's good, and I hope that Top Gun never needed a sequel, but now it's got one. I hope it's a good one. And if you're enjoying the Bond content, which I hope you are, because I'm enjoying talking about these films and revisiting them. Next Tuesday, 31st of May, at the slightly earlier time of 11 p.m. British Standard Time, I'm going to be talking about the 1971 film Diamonds Are Forever, where Connery comes back for one more film and then leaves again. I've had a lot of negative opinions on this film in the past, but actually, and I'm not just saying this to kind of, you know, be fake or anything like that, or to try and get you guys to come back next week, which I hope you do, by the way. I hope you do come back next week and help me talk about Diamonds Are Forever. I've had a lot of negative opinions on that film before, but with these rescreenings, I'm going to try and... I mentioned this last week in that every single time that I've watched Diamonds Are Forever has been when I've watched it in sequence. All the James Bond films in order. So you hit the highest heights of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, that when you get to Diamonds Are Forever, it kind of comes crashing down for me, and I've always been very negative on it. But next week, although I'm going to be watching it in similar circumstances in that I've watched them in sequence again week to week, I really want to go into that film forgetting On Her Majesty's Secret Service and just appreciating it for the film that it is, and kind of watching it in a vacuum and see if it really is as bad as I remember, or maybe it'll be like a guilty pleasure film for me and it'll be entertaining, which I really hope it is. I do want to have a bit of a turnaround on Diamonds Are Forever next week, and fingers crossed I will. Whew, right, I'm all talked out. No, I'm not. Go and follow me on Twitter. There it is. Going across the bottom of the screen. You can find me at Hobbit Fan Editor. That's at Hobbit Fan Editor. Posting more stuff, but I let you know when I'm going live for stuff and when you can expect videos and everything like that. Of course, at the end of this week, we're going to be hitting the Disney Plus series of Kenobi, which I will be talking about. I don't know when I can talk about that yet, because actually I'm out Friday night and I'm out most of Saturday, but I'm going to try and work something out. I might be able to get a review pre-recorded on Friday before I head out and get it published that night. I do want to get a review out to you guys as soon as possible for Kenobi, and that's of course is going to be a weekly thing, which I think, whether it is this week, but it certainly will be the following week, will be every Friday when the new episodes posted. So a lot of content this week, a lot of stuff to talk about. So thank you to everyone that's tuned in tonight and commented along. Well, SeaWorld Man, you commented along at least, but I did see some people watching at least. Thank you very much. Get my words out. I'm going to have a drink before I do this sign off. Give me a second. Have a very good night, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, everyone.